My life growing up was pretty unstable. I wanted so bad to have that nuclear family that I had lacked.
Brian Cargill is an architect in search of a wife and the white picket fence.
Kimberly was really beautiful and charismatic. I felt like, oh, she really gets me.
But when Kimberly turns into a human wrecking ball,
It's just out of nowhere. She just punched me in the face.
It's bad and evil. He was sleeping with the devil.
no one in Brian's life will be safe.
I took photographs of the abuse. We went into hiding immediately.
This body was so badly burned, they couldn't identify who it was.
She is one of the most vindictive, violent female psychopaths ever.
I was born in Wichita Falls, Texas. It was a great way to grow up, for sure. The adults are like, kids go outside, and so we just played in the barn where there's like big tractors and stuff. It was really fun. And my parents were married for about 3 years, and they got divorced. So my mom was pretty much a single mom, and she moved us around a lot.
As a boy, Brian Cargill's life is in constant motion.
I ended up going to probably 6 different elementary schools, probably 5 or 6 different junior highs, and 3 different high schools. It was pretty unstable most of the time.
Brian vows to build a secure future for himself. And when he graduates high school, he sets his sights on architecture.
I've always been very interested in buildings and structures and things like that. It just came so naturally to me. So by the time I got to graduation time, I already knew that I was going to go to architecture school.
By 1993, Brian is a 28-year-old architect living in Dallas. He's happily married, or so he thinks.
After a couple of years, my wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore. And so I was just kind of left reeling. It was a big shock for me. At that point, my dreams had pretty much crumbled, and I was in an extremely vulnerable state. I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was just so distraught over this loss of kind of this idea of the nuclear family. That just seems like all I could think about.
9 months after the divorce is finalized, one of Brian's friends sets him up on a blind date.
He described her as very beautiful and very vivacious and intelligent, and he thought that we would be a good match.
Kimberly West is a 27-year-old receptionist.
We met, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised. She was really beautiful and just a very charismatic personality. She had just gotten divorced. She was in a custody situation with her ex. And so we kind of had some things in common. You know, we really hit it off.
Over the next several weeks, Brian and Kimberly start talking on the phone every day.
I felt like, oh, she really gets me. That she heard me, that she identified with me in a way that certainly my ex-wife had not done at all. It felt very romantic and just exciting. So it was great. Our second date was at a divorce support group at a church. And I got there a little early, and she was running late. Instead of waiting outside, I decided to just go ahead and go in. And so I sat down, and I kind of saved her a chair next to me. She finally came in, and she looked straight at me and kind of gave me a mean look. She sat in a different chair across the group from me. And so I was very kind of mystified as to, what was going on. After that, she really was mad at me because I had gone in ahead of her. She said, "This is my support group. You're my guest." She's like really kind of disproportionately angry about that. Then, just out of nowhere, she just held me back. It was kind of getting a little passionate. And then she just said, "I have to leave now." The whole thing left me feeling, this is a little weird. That whole second date was just strange.
As unnerving as the experience is, the next time Kimberly and Brian see each other, she acts as if nothing happened.
It started getting much more passionate. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and it was very powerful, and it was one that I'd not really experienced to that degree up until that point in my life. Kimberly was able to stir these feelings, in me, the passionate feelings both physically and emotionally. I feel like I started falling in love with her pretty quickly, just because I did feel like this immediate, really strong connection.
Kimberly seems to be feeling the same way, because she treats Brian like he is a close, trusted companion.
Kimberly has a court date with her ex-husband, and he's going for full custody.
She wanted me to testify in court for her as a character witness. And at this point, I had known her for maybe 2 months. So I went to the courthouse with her, and when she was in the hearing, one of her friends gave me a copy of her psychological report. I read through the report, but so much of it, I didn't know what to make of it. Like, it had a lot of psychological terms that I wasn't familiar with, such as narcissism and borderline personality disorder.
Now, borderline personality disorder, that's the mother of all disorders. That's everything combined into one.
And individuals with borderline personality disorder have affective instability. They have emotions that are unstable. This is somebody who is highly impulsive, dramatic, has an intense fear of abandonment, and furthermore expresses typically some type of violence. It can be verbal aggression, physical aggression.
I was very conflicted about the whole report and wasn't sure what to make of it. She told me that her husband paid off psychologists to make fabricated psychological reports. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is a professional psychologist, and they don't just fabricate reports. And so I thought there was something there that I needed to be careful about.
The judge rules against Kimberly, and she is devastated. Brian feels for her and doesn't question her about the report.
I didn't want to have another failed relationship. In my previous marriage, I didn't get to fight for that relationship at all. So I didn't want to just walk away from the relationship, but kind of fight for it and do the best I possibly could to make it work.
The couple continue to see each other but live separately. Brian walks on eggshells to avoid Kimberly's bad temper.
If I said anything at all positive about my ex-wife, she would often jump all over that and say something pretty mean and nasty about her. Kimberly would often try to undermine my relationship with my ex-wife because she felt like it was threatening her relationship with me. Kimberly always could escalate, just acted very aggressively.
Really, what you have here is a powder keg. She's always exploding in this fit of rage if she doesn't get her way. She screams, she yells, it's my way or no way.
That was making me very unhappy. I started feeling that, okay, I don't think I need to be in this relationship. This relationship is starting to be something that's negative for me.
5 months into the relationship, Brian is ready to make a clean break.
We just had one fight too many, and I had finally solidified my resolve that I was going to break up. So I knew I was going to have this conversation with her. I'd kind of prepared for it mentally. So I don't care what she says, I'm done with this. I was actually feeling pretty good about it. I was feeling a little bit of a sense of relief that I had kind of dodged a bullet. Okay, I'm going to put this behind me, just move on. I was about to say, all right, I'm done with this. I'm not seeing you anymore. Don't call me, etc. And that's when she told me she was pregnant.
I'm pregnant.
I felt like I was at the beginning of a horrible, horrible journey.
Just as Brian Cargill is about to break up with his girlfriend Kimberly, she tells him she is pregnant.
In that moment, my entire body just dropped, and it felt like kind of falling over a cliff. It's this flush of dread that just completely fills you and overwhelms you. But my first thought was, okay, we're gonna make this work. We're gonna take this curveball and we're gonna hit it out of the park. I mean, I'm not gonna walk away from a woman that is carrying my child. I'm just not gonna do that. And so I did propose to her the idea that, you know, I will stick by you during the pregnancy. I want to be a part of the child's life no matter what, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be married to do that. And she put it to me very plainly.
You'll never see me again.
If you don't marry me, you're not having anything to do with this child. Period.
It is the ultimate blackmail. Guess what? I'm pregnant. And now you're stuck. Anything is possible with this woman. She'll do anything.
I felt like I'd put myself in a situation where I didn't really have a lot of a choice. The value of being a parent had to trump really everything else. A couple days later, we went out and had a nice little engagement dinner. In that moment, I tried to get as much out of it as I could, get as much joy and celebration as I could, and kind of leave the other stuff behind. And even though it wasn't going to be as pure as I wanted originally, still could be something.
The fact that he stays with her after all of this is a huge testament to his character. But it also tells her, I can do anything I want to this guy. And you know what? He's going to stick around. Why? Because he has a conscience. She doesn't.
In June of 1994, Brian and Kimberly have a small, intimate wedding in New Mexico.
We had a little wedding at my mom's house, and I tried to maintain an air of kind of celebration and that I was happy about it and everything, but deep inside, I was really scared and just dreading kind of what was to come. To the point where right after the ceremony, I kind of went in the back of the house and just kind of had a good cry and just kind of let out so many of these emotions that I was having there.
The couple move in together, and a few months later in November, Kimberly gives birth to their son, Jamie.
After Jamie was born, I was jubilant. And so it was kind of a nice period of time. It was pretty calm, relatively peaceful. I felt a sense of relief that maybe this was gonna start to be okay. Maybe we can make this work. But then things really kind of went downhill. I remember one time I had gone into the bedroom and locked the bedroom door because I was trying to kind of get away from her. So she started like kicking the door. And so I was like, okay, this is not good. So I opened the door and I walked out. And then this hammer comes just whizzes by my head and sticks into the wall. And I turned around and I looked at her, and she had kind of this wild look in her eyes.
The hammer lodges itself in the wall, and what does she do? She leaves it there. She tells him, don't you touch that hammer. Why? She wants to remind him, if you don't do what I say, there's gonna be a price.
And I just remember just this horrible feeling just washed over me about, man, what am I doing? How am I ever gonna like get through this? It was just definitely just the low point in my life.
Kimberly's violent streak is only just beginning.
We were sitting in a car and she got angry with me because of a conversation we were having, and she with her fist just punched me as hard as she could in the face. It was just such a shock that I just said, I'm done. That punch in the face was really just the final straw. I just got out of the car and I left and never went back.
Brian immediately files for divorce from Kimberly. Over the following months, the battle for custody of his son becomes emotional warfare, with Kimberly pulling out all the stops to make Brian's life miserable.
Brian, this is Kimberly. I'm sick of being hung up on. The only reason why I tried you at 7:45 at work is because I had been trying your other number since last night.
So at this point, she was not working at all. And she would call me all the time. At some point, I started creating a phone log all the times that she called me. I counted one day, like literally 50 times she called me at work.
I'm just disgusted with your treatment of me. I'm disgusted with your ulterior motives.
She would call, and I would say, I'm busy. And then she would start threatening the receptionist. It was just insanity. Eventually, I decided to leave my first job just because she had called me at work so many times. But I was giving her basically all my money. I was still paying her rent and like giving her probably 75% of my paycheck every month. That was a tough time.
Brian can't afford a lawyer and sees Jamie at Kimberly's whim during the divorce process. When the dust settles in 1995, he gets shared custody of Jamie, but Kimberly continues to make life difficult.
She would kind of do a bait and switch in terms of visitation with my son.
I'm not keeping him from you, but I'm not going to allow him to go off overnight until several matters are mediated.
That was the big thing, was I was always at her mercy when I could see him. One time, she got really mad at me and decided I wasn't going to see Jamie anymore, ever. I showed up at her house, and she wouldn't give him to me.
It doesn't make any sense why you would drive all the way out here knowing that I'm not going to turn Jamie over.
Another time, I came anyway, even though she said she wasn't going to let me have him, and then she just let me have him. So she just liked to play games with the visitation.
It's a tough blow for Brian.
I loved my son before he was born. To see him and spend time with him, it's almost like a spiritual, you know what that connection is like.
Really, the only hold that she has over Brian now is the child, but that's a huge piece of leverage. She has a piece of Brian's heart. She knows the guy is a caring individual and that he loves his child. So she is totally using this child to manipulate the guy.
Over the years, Jamie pays a steep price for being Brian's son.
I was concerned. A lot of times he would call me asking me for help. He would tell me things that were alarming. Like, she started screaming at me, and so I ran out the door and ran down the street to someone's phone to call.
Hey, Daddy, it's me. I'm scared.
Those kinds of calls are gut-wrenching. I was really scared for him.
When he's just 11 years old, Jamie makes a chilling confession to Brian.
They had this big physical conflict. She put a belt around his neck.
She wraps a belt and drags the kid around the room. Let me drag him around the room, cut off his oxygen to let him know who the boss is. Could it get any more violent than that?
Jamie was at a point where he thought he was going to be strangled. He thought that his life was going to end. So it was a dramatic escalation in violence.
Sorry. I saw outright abuse that leaves bruises, marks. I was horrified. What parent wouldn't be horrified to see their child injured?
When Brian hears about this, that's it. He's got to take that kid out of that house. He has to. When you look at all of this building up, what is she gonna do next? What's left? Murder?
Brian Cargill has just found out that his 11-year-old son has been physically abused by his ex-wife, Kimberly.
I finally had evidence, like hardcore, irrefutable evidence that I could take to a judge and make some progress. I took photographs of the abuse and then immediately went to an attorney.
Brian reports Kimberly to Child Protective Services, providing them with proof of her abuse. And 10 years after the divorce in 2006, he finally gains full custody of Jamie.
It was a positive step for sure. At least now I had some sense of stability with my son.
But shockingly, the courts still allow Kimberly unsupervised visitation.
He would go to her house every other weekend. And there was always that worry for him.
With the system failing his son, Brian remains vigilant and keeps a watchful eye on Kimberly. But soon, he finds a measure of peace after meeting a woman worthy of his love.
We met and kind of hit it off, and after that, that was it. It's like we didn't really date anyone else. From our first date, we were pretty much, okay, this is it. I knew that she would make my life better. She is truly like the most emotionally stable person I know. So for me, that was a big, as you can imagine, that was a big priority.
Kimberly moves on with her life as well. She goes to nursing school and marries another man. They have a son.
Happy first birthday. We love you, Keith, Jill, Madeline, and Hayes.
But it doesn't last. Soon, Kimberly is divorced and engaged in yet another custody battle. This time, it will turn deadly. The trouble begins when she decides to hire a babysitter for her 4-year-old son while she's at work as a licensed nurse.
A friend of hers mentions a woman, Cherry Walker, in an apartment building not far from where she lives. By all accounts, she's just this wonderful, warm, 39-year-old woman.
Cherry was described as a very friendly, agreeable individual who had an interest in babysitting. Cherry had an IQ of 56, so this is profoundly developmentally disabled. So she was operating at a 6th grade level. So someone who could arguably be very easily manipulated.
She's living in an apartment by herself for the first time in her life. She has an aide that visits her at the apartment to make sure she's doing okay. And in walks Kimberly Cargill. The devil walks into Cherry Walker's life. And it's never going to be the same again.
Cherry is unable to say no to Kimberly, who takes advantage of her kindness.
Kimberly would drop the son off at Cherry's apartment and just leave him there for hours, come back super late or the next morning to pick him up. Cherry was on a very fixed income given her disability. She relied on food stamps to buy food for herself. And so she had this little boy at her house who would be dropped off hungry. Kimberly didn't leave any money for food, so Cherry would share hers.
Kimberly found someone she could exploit at will. Hey, can I drop the kid off for 2 hours? She'd come back 8 hours later. Or she'd drop the child off and maybe not show up for 2-3 days.
Thanks a lot for
She knew that Cherry Walker really wasn't going to say anything about this, that she could just continually do this over and over and over again.
The boy's father accuses Kimberly of abusing their son.
Kimberly Cargill's child is being abused, and social services gets involved, and they open an investigation against her.
In March of 2010, Child Protective Services removes Kimberly's son from her home. A custody hearing is ordered, and Cherry Walker is unwittingly caught up in the legal battle.
The court subpoena Cherry Walker to testify in court against Kimberly Cargill.
Cherry receives a subpoena as a frequent caretaker of the little boy. Immediately, Kimberly becomes concerned because if Cherry Walker is taking the stand in court, it'll become quickly evident that Kimberly's really not fit to be caring for a young child.
I think that Kimberly was specifically worried about Cherry's testimony because Cherry was probably going to say something truthful, saying that she was a bad mother and violent.
Cherry's taking care of that child. She had seen the abuse and the neglect that Kimberly Cargill perpetrated against that child. She was really the best witness.
I think that Kimberly believed everything was riding on this particular hearing. This was the last son she had custody of. This was her last hope to prove that she was a competent mother. This was her last chance.
Kimberly's first reaction is to just blow up Cherry Walker's phone. She actually calls her over 70 times, so she's panicking.
Cherry is not the only person who Kimberly is frantically calling. On June 18, 2010, just 5 days before Kimberly's custody hearing is set to begin, she phones her ex, Brian.
I was on the way out of town with my wife going on a long weekend, and Kimberly called me. I saw it was her and I didn't answer. She left a message on my voicemail. It was a bit frantic. Have you been subpoenaed? What are you going to tell them if they subpoena you? It was a little strange, but I just kind of disregarded it. Kimberly was really the last person that I wanted to hear from.
The next day, on June 19th, a driver on a small country road makes a tragic discovery.
This young guy is out delivering pizza. He's driving down the road and he realizes he went past the address, so he has to do a turnaround. He heads into this gravel area where it's an open field, and then he looks and he sees what appears to be a body. So of course, he dials 911, and in come the crime scene guys.
Investigators rush to the scene.
They find a woman face down, and it appears that she had been burned. Her body has been charred. Her skin is actually peeling off. It's been burned so badly. And in between her legs, they find this empty creamer container. It's not burned. They also determine that the victim has not been there long, probably within 24 hours.
Investigators determined that this person likely died of homicidal violence because this body was so badly burned, they couldn't identify who it was.
Detectives can't find an ID anywhere near the body, so they put out a media alert in hopes of getting any information on their Jane Doe. Across town, Guthrie and Rowan Walker, a pastor and his wife, reach out to police. Their beloved daughter has been missing for 24 hours.
This is a daughter who is constantly in touch with them. There's not maybe 4 hours that go by that they don't know where she is. Nobody has seen her. And there's one thing their daughter never does, and that is miss church. But on this day, she never shows up. And this is when they begin to realize something's drastically wrong here. So where is she? A media report goes out of this victim that's found, and they just know in their heart and their soul that it's her. So they go to the police, and sure enough, it's their daughter, Cherry Walker.
Smith County sheriffs have identified a burned female victim as Cherry Walker by using her dental records. Brian Cargill finds out about Cherry's murder when he gets a call from Kimberly's mother.
That kind of blew me away. It was pretty surreal. And I immediately kind of made the connection with Kimberly. Maybe she had something to do with this. Jamie and I went into hiding immediately. It was surreal for sure. I never imagined that I would be in that kind of a situation where I'd be afraid that someone was gonna come and attack us. It was a scary thought, that maybe she had gotten into this manic state and was ready to come out and kill everyone she knew.
investigators conduct a search of Cherry Walker's apartment, looking for leads.
They're looking around, and they discover several voicemails. They're from a woman named Kim, who says, "Hey, Cherry, I have to talk to you." And she sounds a bit frantic.
Cell phone records also showed that this number had called Cherry over and over and over and over. There were dozens upon dozens of phone calls to Cherry Walker the day before she went missing.
So investigators immediately need to find out, who is this Kim? They interview Cherry Walker's aide, and they ask her, "Do you know anybody named Kim?" "Oh yeah, I know somebody named Kim. That's Kimberly Cargill." So now they're getting somewhere.
Cherry's caregiver was one of the last people to see her before she went missing, and during the course of questioning her, police learn about the situation with Kimberly Cargill, the babysitting arrangement, the subpoena, and the child custody hearing. She says Kimberly told Cherry not to go to court, to ignore the subpoena, but Cherry wanted to follow the rules. She was really concerned about getting in trouble.
She's scared. Kimberly is blowing up Cherry's phone, calling, and she wants to meet with Cherry to discuss the situation.
In Cherry's last conversation with the caregiver, Cherry says Kimberly is going to come over, she's going to take me out to dinner, and Cherry's caregiver tells her, "Do not go, lock the door, go to bed, do not answer if Kimberly comes to your house, and don't go anywhere with her."
She goes, "Listen, ignore Kim, get some sleep, and tomorrow we'll deal with all of this." But for Cherry Walker, tomorrow never comes. The aide never sees her again.
Investigators head directly to Kimberly's house to speak with her.
She comes to the door, and they say, "Hey, listen, we want to talk to you about Cherry Walker." And she says, "I don't think I should talk to you without my lawyer." That's a red flag. If you're a friend of this woman's, why wouldn't you want to talk to us?
Kimberly maintained her arrogant disposition the whole way. The police wanted to search the house, and Kimberly would not permit them.
So investigators park down the street. They sit in their car, and they wait for Kim Cargill to leave. She leaves. She starts driving. Kimberly is really frantic. She's totally out of her mind. And she blows through a stop sign. So they pull her over. And immediately, what do they notice in her car? One of those creamer containers. And what do they have at their crime scene where Cherry Walker was dumped? They have that same empty container of creamer. So there's a connection. They seize her car, and they tow that car to forensics.
While the forensics team searches Kimberly's car for evidence, police execute a search warrant for her home.
Investigators made note that the house was messy. There were dirty clothes, trash everywhere, pieces of food on the floor, used takeout, fast food containers, trash in the bathtub. It was very unclean and disarray.
And then they go into the laundry room. They see laundry piled up from probably weeks. But in the washing machine, there's one sheet. Kim Cargill was washing one sheet? Question mark. Why? At the crime scene, they found these tire tracks, and those match perfectly to Kimberly Cargill's vehicle. They also find that Kimberly's DNA matches the DNA found on the coffee creamer container found between Cherry Walker's legs. They have now connected Kimberly Cargill to the murder scene and to the body. She is arrested, and they charge her with capital felony murder. She's dead to rights. There's no doubt in their mind that Kimberly Cargill murdered Cherry Walker.
Kimberly Cargill has been arrested and charged in the brutal murder of her son's babysitter, 39-year-old Cherry Walker.
It was a big relief when she was arrested. We all kind of were able to breathe a little better, sleep a little bit better at night. There was really not a doubt in my mind that she was guilty.
In May of 2012, Kimberly's case goes to trial in Smith County. By this time, and much to Brian's relief, Kimberly has had minimal contact with her son, Jamie.
As a prosecutor, I believe she killed Cherry Walker, and I wanted to get justice for Cherry. I believed in the evidence. When you have an item with the DNA sample, that belongs to Kim Cargill, and Kim Cargill knows Cherry Walker, and Cherry Walker was going to be picked up by her that night. You know, it's not hard to put two and two together on this. You just dumped a body, killed someone and dumped a body, and set it on fire.
It appears that Kimberly Cargill strangled Cherry Walker inside her house, wrapped her in a sheet, took her out into that field by the road, untangled her from the sheet, poured some sort of accelerant on her, and lit her on fire to cover up forensic evidence.
She killed her. She dumped her body and burned it so she wouldn't get caught. It all supports everything that common sense tells you, that Kim didn't want Cherry to testify. She didn't want her to go to that hearing because she felt like it was going to be a problem. And then all of a sudden, Cherry's dead. So, you know, it all fits.
Kimberly takes the stand in her own defense and pleads not guilty.
Her defense was that she was there when Cherry Walker died, but she did not kill her. She said that she took Cherry out to dinner to talk about the whole situation.
She says she's driving down the road and Cherry Walker had a seizure and that she could not save her or revive her from it. She died.
She said she drove around in a panic, dumped the body into a field, and burned it because she was afraid, even though she said she didn't kill her, she would get blamed for it, so she tried to dispose of the body.
There's a point where Kimberly's behavior kind of borders on delusional. She was supremely confident in her ability to escape responsibility, to manipulate. She thinks that the jury is going to look at this excuse and say, oh, that makes sense. You know, your friend dies, so you set them on fire and dump their body.
Brian Cargill is called as a witness for the prosecution.
When I was in court testifying and on the stand, I did not want to look at her. I was aware of her, but I never really looked her in the eye. I just had no need for that. You know, what she had done was horrible. She took someone else's life, which is hard to even really fathom.
The jury quickly comes back with a verdict.
We, the jury, found the defendant, Kimberly Cargill, guilty of the offense of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
The verdict came in, I felt relieved that Kim had been held accountable for what she did.
Kimberly Cargill is found guilty on all counts of capital felony murder, and they vote for the death penalty.
It didn't surprise me at all that she would get the death penalty. She took advantage of Cherry to that degree and then turned around and killed her. I mean, that's just outrageous. It really is outrageous.
In the aftermath of the sentencing, those who knew Kimberly are left wondering how she could have committed such a heinous act.
That always stuck out to me, that we have this spectrum of goodness and kindness and a sweet person cross paths with everything that was bad and evil. Kim was someone who had no empathy for others, no feelings of regret or remorse for anything she did.
Kimberly was nothing but a menace who abused Brian and abused her children. I think she is one of the most vindictive, violent female psychopaths ever. Brian Cargill should consider himself lucky, and he should count his blessings because he was sleeping with the devil. Only the devil decided not to kill him, but to kill somebody else.
Even though she met a tragic end, Cherry's light will never be forgotten.
When the trial concluded, there was a photo and evidence of Cherry. She was smiling. She was happy. I printed that photo. I put it in a frame. I wanted that photo in my office to remember as a prosecutor why you do it. Her father told me that I never thought lawyers or law enforcement would care about a mentally handicapped black woman. It hurt me that he had to carry that with him. It broke my heart. I was very proud that we were able to get justice for her, show him that we did care deeply for your daughter. She was a beautiful woman. We fought hard for her, and now Kim will be held accountable for what she did.
As for Brian, he's moved on from the turmoil and found a silver lining in his life.
You know, they say time heals all wounds. It's a cliche, but I think every single day heals a little bit more. My kids have really taught me kind of how to love, if you will. Jamie, he's doing much better now. He's a chef. He's got a good job, and he's adulting, which is what we raise him for. We live in a household of 5, my wife and I, and 3 dogs. It's great. I mean, I don't have any complaints. We're able to live life pretty stress-free and, you know, do what we want to do. And so, you know, feel pretty good.
Kansas 1990 cold case cracked. Decades-old DNA match stuns investigators. The first snow of December covered the fields outside Ashford, Kansas, before anyone realized 23-year-old Emily Carter had disappeared. Her red pickup truck remained parked behind the diner where she had finished her evening shift. Her purse sat untouched on the driver's seat. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was cold. The coffee she bought minutes earlier rested in the cup holder, half full. It looked as though she had stepped away for only a moment. She never came back. Within hours, the quiet farming town transformed into a crime scene. Sheriff's deputies searched every road leading out of town. Volunteers combed frozen fields carrying flashlights that cut through the darkness. Helicopters circled overhead. Bloodhounds followed Emily's scent across the parking lot before stopping abruptly near the highway. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The headlines arrived before sunrise. Young waitress missing. Kansas community fears the worst. No witnesses. No suspects. No answers. The search stretched into another day. Then another. 3 days later, a farmer discovered a single tennis shoe lying beside a drainage ditch nearly 12 miles from town. It belonged to Emily. 100 yards farther, investigators found signs of a struggle. Broken branches. Disturbed soil. A silver necklace clasp buried beneath frozen mud. But there was no body. The discovery intensified the investigation. Detectives photographed every inch of the scene. Tire impressions were cast before fresh snow erased them. Dozens of fibers were collected from nearby brush. Every cigarette butt, bottle cap, and footprint was preserved. Forensic science in 1990 had limits, but investigators refused to leave anything behind. Hundreds of interviews followed. Emily's co-workers described her as friendly and cautious. Neighbors said she always called home if she planned to stay out late. Friends insisted she had no enemies. Former boyfriends were questioned. Truck drivers passing through town were identified. Known offenders living within 50 miles were interviewed. Nothing connected. Every lead collapsed. Then the call came. A hunter walking through a wooded creek bed nearly 20 miles east of Ashford noticed torn fabric beneath fallen branches. Deputies arrived within minutes. The silence that settled over Forrest told them everything before the forensic team even reached the scene. Emily Carter had been found. The crime scene was brutal. Investigators recovered clothing, personal belongings, and several biological samples that could not be identified with the technology available at the time. Everything was carefully packaged, labeled, and placed into evidence storage. Detectives believed the answers were somewhere inside those sealed envelopes. They simply lacked the science to find them. The autopsy confirmed homicide. The medical examiner estimated she had fought fiercely. Defensive wounds covered both hands. Bruises lined her forearms. She had struggled until the very end. The town gathered for her funeral beneath gray winter skies. Businesses closed early. School buses drove with headlights on. Church bells echoed across the valley as hundreds of residents stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. Parents refused to let children walk alone. Doors that had never been locked suddenly stayed bolted every night. Ashford had lost more than a young woman. It had lost its sense of safety. Months became years. Detectives chased dozens of suspects. Anonymous letters, false confessions, psychics claiming visions. Rumors spread through coffee shops and church parking lots. Every promising lead ended the same way. No evidence, no arrest, no justice. Boxes filled with reports slowly disappeared onto evidence shelves. Photographs faded. Witnesses moved away. Some detectives retired. Others died. The murder officially became a cold case, but one investigator refused to let it disappear. Detective Frank Donovan had worked the original scene in 1990. Every anniversary, he returned to the evidence room. He reread witness statements. He spread photographs across his desk. He circled details everyone else had stopped noticing. A missing wristwatch, an unidentified pickup scene near the diner, an unknown fingerprint too smudged for comparison. He believed someone had made one mistake. One mistake was all he needed. In the spring of 2024, 34 years after Emily's murder, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation launched a statewide initiative to re-examine unsolved homicide evidence using modern forensic DNA technology. Hundreds of cold case files were reviewed. Emily Carter's file was among them. Technicians reopened evidence sealed decades earlier. Every package was photographed. Every chain of custody record verified. Among the preserved items was a tiny biological sample recovered from beneath Emily's fingernails. In 1990, the sample was too small to produce a usable DNA profile. Today, technology had changed. Scientists carefully extracted what remained. The process took weeks. No one expected much. Then the laboratory computer displayed something investigators had waited more than 3 decades to see: a complete male DNA profile. Silence filled the laboratory. The analyst checked the results again. Then a third time. There was no contamination. No mistake. For the first time since the murder, detectives possessed the one piece of evidence capable of identifying a killer. No one in the room celebrated. They understood what this meant. Somewhere, the man connected to that DNA had spent 34 years believing he had escaped forever. He had built a life, held jobs, made friends, perhaps started a family, completely unaware that a microscopic trace left beneath the victim's fingernails had survived every passing year. The sample was uploaded into national databases. Hours passed, then days. No match. The killer had never been arrested for a qualifying offense. The investigation reached another crossroads. Except this time, detectives had a weapon unavailable in 1990. Forensic genetic genealogy. And that would change everything. The DNA profile entered a forensic genealogy laboratory under the strictest chain of custody procedures. Scientists were not looking for the killer himself. They were looking for relatives, people who had unknowingly shared fragments of his genetic code through generations. The first search produced almost nothing. A handful of distant matches. Third cousins, fourth cousins, names scattered across Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Missouri. Individually, they meant very little. Together, they formed the beginning of a family tree. Genealogists spent weeks buried in census records, marriage licenses, military files, newspaper archives, cemetery records, and handwritten birth certificates. Every branch expanded into another. Every generation produced dozens of new names. The tree soon covered an entire conference room wall. Colored strings connected families across nearly a century. Slowly, the branches began converging, again and again, until they pointed toward one farming family that had lived in central Kansas since the 1940s. Detectives now had fewer than 20 possible men. The list shrank after comparing ages. Several had been children in 1990. Others were already living in different states. One had died years before. Within another week, only 4 names remained. All 4 had lived within 70 miles of Ashford during the winter Emily Carter disappeared. Investigators quietly reopened every file connected to those men. Employment records, vehicle registrations, old utility bills, traffic citations, hunting licenses. One file immediately stood out. A man named Richard Mason, 29 years old in 1990, construction worker, owned a dark blue Ford pickup, worked on highway projects that frequently brought him through Ashford, no criminal record, never interviewed, never considered a suspect. Detectives couldn't understand why. They searched the original case files again. Finally, buried inside a box labeled Inactive Leads, they found a single witness statement taken 4 days after murder. A waitress from the diner remembered seeing a man sitting alone in a blue pickup nearly an hour before Emily finished her shift. She described him as wearing a tan work jacket and muddy boots. She had written down part of the truck's license plate. The note had never been followed up. The ink had faded almost beyond recognition, but modern digital enhancement recovered enough numbers to identify the registration. It belonged to Richard Mason. The room fell completely silent. Lead Detective Sarah Collins stared at the document. This was here the entire time. Nobody answered. Someone had simply missed it. Investigators immediately began rebuilding Mason's life. He had left Kansas in 1993, moved twice, married, raised 2 children, retired from a construction company outside Wichita. Neighbors described him as quiet, reliable, friendly, exactly the kind of man no one ever suspected. Surveillance teams were assigned, not because detectives intended to arrest him. Not yet. DNA connected him genetically to the crime. But prosecutors needed proof that would survive a courtroom challenge. For 6 days, investigators watched his routine. Morning coffee, hardware store, evening walks. Nothing unusual. On the 7th morning, Mason stopped at a roadside diner. While driving to visit his grandson, he finished breakfast, folded the newspaper, drank the last sip of coffee, then threw the paper cup into a trash can before leaving. The surveillance team waited until his truck disappeared down the highway. A plainclothes detective wearing gloves quietly recovered the cup. Within an hour, it was inside the state crime laboratory. Scientists extracted DNA from saliva left along the rim. Nobody in the investigation slept well that week. The laboratory worked around the clock. Every step was repeated, every calculation verified. 5 days later, the report arrived. The DNA recovered from Richard Mason's discarded coffee cup matched the male DNA profile recovered beneath Emily Carter's fingernails. The statistical probability of another unrelated individual sharing the same profile was less than 1 in several hundred octillion. Lead Detective Collins read the report twice. Then she placed it on the conference table. No one spoke. 34 years of questions suddenly had a name attached to them. But another question immediately replaced the first. If Richard Mason killed Emily Carter, why had he never appeared on anyone's radar? The answer was waiting inside another forgotten evidence box that had not been opened since January 1990. The forgotten evidence box sat on the highest shelf of the county archives. Its cardboard had softened with age. The tape was brittle. A layer of dust covered the faded case number, and one corner had collapsed under the weight of dozens of other files stacked on top of it. A yellow evidence tag, signed in January 1990, still hung from a handle. Detective Sarah Collins carried it into the review room herself. No one spoke. Every person in the room understood that forgotten boxes sometimes held forgotten answers. Inside were dozens of items that had never been examined with modern technology. A disposable camera, a torn road map, 2 cassette tapes containing witness interviews, several undeveloped rolls of film, a pair of gloves collected near the creek, a receipt from a gas station 30 miles outside Ashford. Most investigators expected nothing. Then the crime scene analyst unfolded a large evidence envelope. Inside lay tire track photographs, hundreds of them. Every impression had been photographed from multiple angles before the snowstorm buried the scene forever. In 1990, investigators compared the tracks by eye. Now they scanned every image into a three-dimensional forensic database. Within hours, software isolated an unusual tread pattern. One rear tire had worn unevenly. A small section of the outer tread was missing, creating a distinctive notch that repeated every full rotation. The analysts enlarged the photographs. The pattern appeared again. And again, it was as unique as a fingerprint. Detectives immediately subpoenaed maintenance records for Richard Mason's blue Ford pickup. The truck itself no longer existed. Insurance records showed it had been sold at auction in 1998 after a collision, but one repair invoice survived. 6 months before Emily's murder, Mason had purchased a full set of truck tires. The receipt included the exact manufacturer and model. Investigators located the retired mechanic who had performed the installation. At first, he remembered nothing. Then Detective Collins showed him the enlarged tread photograph. The old man leaned forward. His expression changed instantly. "I remember that tire." Everyone in the room froze. It kept wearing on one side. I told him the axle was slightly bent. "What did he do?" He said replacing the axle could wait. The mechanic pointed directly at the damaged section visible in the enlarged photograph. That missing tread didn't happen by accident. It developed because he ignored the repair. The statement alone could not prove murder, but it connected Mason's truck to the exact tire impressions preserved at the crime scene. Another piece of the puzzle locked into place. Meanwhile, forensic specialists enhanced the undeveloped film recovered from the evidence box. Most frames showed search teams working around the creek. Others documented tire impressions before they disappeared beneath fresh snow. Then, one frame drew immediate attention. Far in the background, barely visible, a blue pickup truck, not parked near the body, parked nearly half a mile away along an abandoned farm road. The image was grainy, too distant to identify a license plate, but modern enhancement recovered enough detail to reveal something unexpected. The truck was missing its rear hubcap, exactly as one witness had described 34 years earlier. Detective Collins stared at the monitor, so the witness was telling the truth. Another detective nodded slowly. They were telling the truth all along. Investigators returned to every witness statement that had been dismissed in 1990. One elderly farmer had reported hearing a truck accelerate across gravel shortly after midnight. A teenage paperboy remembered seeing headlights leaving the abandoned road before dawn. Neither account had seemed important at the time. Together, they formed a timeline that placed Mason's truck exactly where detectives believed the killer had entered and exited the scene. The evidence continued to grow. DNA, the genealogy results, the witness statements, the tire impressions, the repaired axle, the photograph. Each piece strengthened the case. Yet Detective Collins remained cautious. She had worked too many investigations to mistake a strong case for a complete one. She wanted the one thing juries trusted above everything else, a confession. And after 34 years of silence, Richard Mason had no idea detectives were about to knock on his front door. The arrest team left before sunrise, not because detectives feared Richard Mason would run, because they wanted every advantage. 2 unmarked SUVs rolled quietly into a small subdivision outside Wichita just after 5:30 a.m. porch lights were still on. The streets were empty. A light rain fell across the neighborhood, muffling the sound of car doors closing. Detective Sarah Collins watched the house from across the street. A modest brick home, freshly cut grass, an American flag hanging from the front porch, a pickup truck parked in the driveway. Nothing about the property suggested the man inside had spent more than 3 decades carrying the secret of an unsolved murder. At exactly 6:02 a.m., the front door opened. Richard Mason stepped outside, carrying a travel mug. He froze. 5 detectives were already walking toward him. Richard Mason? He nodded, confused. "I'm Detective Sarah Collins with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you regarding the homicide of Emily Carter." For the first time that morning, Mason's expression changed. Only for a fraction of a second, But every investigator saw it. Surprise. Followed immediately by calculation. Then calm. I think you got the wrong person. Collins had heard the sentence hundreds of times before. We have a warrant. Mason quietly placed a coffee mug on the porch railing. He did not resist. Inside the interview room, detectives intentionally avoided discussing DNA. Instead, they talked about 1990, his construction job, his blue pickup, road projects near Ashford, the diner, old co-workers. At first, Mason answered every question without hesitation. I don't remember. It was too long ago. I worked all over the state. I couldn't tell you where I was on any specific night. The interview continued for nearly 3 hours. Detectives slowly introduced old photographs, a map, the tire track images, witness statements. Still, Mason denied knowing Emily Carter, denied ever visiting the diner, denied driving near the creek. Then Detective Collins quietly placed one final photograph on the table, the enhanced image of the blue pickup. Mason stared at it for several seconds. His breathing changed, barely noticeable, but enough. You own this truck. Silence. We have maintenance records. Silence. We have witnesses. Silence. We know where you were. Still nothing. Collins waited. Then she opened a thin folder and slid a single laboratory report across the table. The DNA comparison. No dramatic speech. No raised voice. Just one sentence. Richard, your DNA was found beneath Emily Carter's fingernails. The room became completely silent. Mason looked down at the report. He didn't touch it. He didn't read beyond the first page. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. 34 years of confidence disappeared in a single moment. For almost 2 minutes, nobody spoke. Detectives allowed the silence to do the work. Finally, Mason opened his eyes. His voice was almost a whisper. I never thought. He stopped. Another long pause. I never thought science would catch up. No detective interrupted him. He rubbed both hands across his face. I wasn't planning to kill her. The words landed like a hammer. The interview room remained perfectly still. Mason began speaking slowly, almost mechanically. He claimed he met Emily in the diner that evening. He said they argued after she rejected his advances. He insisted she threatened to call the police after he followed her into the parking lot. The confrontation became physical. He panicked. One decision became another. By sunrise, an innocent young woman was dead. Detectives listened without expression. Every detail he described matched evidence known only to investigators. The abandoned farm road, the creek, the struggle, the missing necklace, the location where her shoe had been found. Facts never released to the public. When the interview ended, Detective Collins quietly gathered the photographs and reports. Outside, reporters had already begun gathering behind police barricades. News helicopters circled overhead. The story spread across Kansas within minutes. A murder that had haunted an entire community since 1990 was no longer a mystery. It had a suspect. It had DNA. And now, it had a confession. The confession changed everything. Within hours, prosecutors assembled a team dedicated solely to the Carter case. Detectives who had spent years chasing dead and suddenly found themselves preparing for the most important trial of their careers. Every report written in 1990 was pulled from storage. Every photograph was rescanned in high resolution. Every witness who was still alive received a phone call. The case that had slept for 34 years was awake again. News spread through Ashford before noon. People stopped talking when they entered the local diner. The courthouse lawn filled with television vans. Neighbors gathered quietly outside Emily Carter's childhood home, leaving flowers beneath the oak tree where ribbons had appeared every anniversary of her disappearance. Many could hardly believe it. Some refused to. They had heard promises before. They had seen suspects questioned before. They had watched hope disappear too many times. Emily's younger sister, now in her 50s, stood outside the cemetery holding a bouquet of white lilies. She looked at the reporters only once. "We've waited longer than some people live," she said quietly. "We'll wait a little longer for justice." Meanwhile, Richard Mason's defense attorney immediately challenged the confession. He argued that detectives had pressured an elderly man during a lengthy interrogation. He questioned the reliability of modern forensic genealogy. He suggested the DNA could have been transferred indirectly. Prosecutors expected every one of those arguments. They had spent months preparing for them. The case would not depend on one confession. It would rest on a mountain of evidence. Forensic scientists explained how the DNA profile had been extracted from material preserved beneath Emily's fingernails since 1990. Crime scene analysts demonstrated the tire track comparison using three-dimensional imaging. Digital specialists presented the enhanced photograph of Mason's blue pickup parked along the abandoned farm road. The retired mechanic testified about the damaged rear axle and the unusually worn tire. Former witnesses, once ignored, finally took the stand. The waitress from the diner identified Mason as the man she had seen watching Emily before closing time. The farmer described hearing a truck speeding away shortly after midnight. The paperboy recalled headlights leaving the isolated road before sunrise. Individually, none of those pieces solved the case. Together, they formed a timeline that left almost no room for doubt. Then came the most emotional testimony. The lead forensic biologist walked into the courtroom carrying a small evidence envelope. It looked ordinary. Brown paper, faded writing, a broken evidence seal. Inside had rested the biological sample collected in 1990. The sample so small that detectives once believed it would never reveal anything. The scientist held it up for the jury. "This," she said, "waited 34 years for technology to catch up." The courtroom fell silent. Several jurors looked toward Emily's family. Some wiped tears from their eyes. The defense continued fighting. Experts were questioned for hours. Laboratory procedures were examined line by line. Every transfer of evidence was scrutinized. Every scientific method challenged. But the chain of custody remained intact. The DNA remained consistent. The confession remained detailed. The physical evidence continued supporting every major point. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments finally arrived. The prosecutor stood before the jury and spoke without raising his voice. Time does not erase truth. It only delays it. He pointed toward the evidence table. A frightened young woman fought for her life in 1990. Without knowing it, she preserved the evidence that would one day identify the man responsible. She spoke through science. And today, you heard her. The jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom emptied into anxious silence. No one knew how long it would take. After 34 years, everyone understood one final decision still remained. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours. For a case that had remained unsolved for more than 3 decades, the decision came with surprising speed. Still, every minute felt endless to those waiting inside the courthouse. Emily Carter's family sat together in the front row. No one spoke. Richard Mason stared at the defense table. His hands remained folded. He avoided looking toward the gallery. Outside, television crews broadcast live updates as residents gathered behind police barricades. Many had followed the case since 1990. Some remembered joining the original search parties. Others had grown up hearing their parents describe a murder that forever changed Ashford. At 4:17 p.m., the courtroom deputy announced the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone stood. The jurors entered quietly. No one could read their expressions. The foreperson handed a sealed envelope to the judge. The courtroom became perfectly still. Even the reporters stopped typing. The judge unfolded the paper. His eyes moved slowly across the page before he looked toward the defendant on the charge of first-degree murder. A brief pause. The jury, find the defendant. Another pause. Guilty. A quiet gasp echoed through the courtroom. Emily's younger sister lowered her head and began to cry. Her son wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Several retired detectives sitting in the back row closed their eyes. For them, the verdict marked the end of a pursuit that had defined much of their careers. Richard Mason showed little emotion. He simply stared forward. The judge thanked the jurors for their service before scheduling sentencing several weeks later. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors asked the court to consider not only the brutality of the crime, but the decades of suffering left behind. Emily's mother had died without knowing who killed her daughter. Her father spent every anniversary placing fresh flowers beside an empty chair at the family dinner table until his own death. Friends described years of fear, unanswered questions, and a community that never truly recovered. When Emily's sister addressed the court, her voice remained calm. You stole 34 years. You stole birthdays. You stole holidays. You stole every family photograph that should have included my sister. She paused. But you never stole our determination to find the truth. There was silence throughout the courtroom. Even Mason looked down. The judge imposed a maximum sentence permitted under Kansas law. As deputies escorted Mason from the courtroom in handcuffs, he glanced briefly toward Emily's family. No apology came. No final explanation. Only silence for the Carter family. However, the silence felt different now. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was a silence that follows an answer. Outside the courthouse, Detective Sarah Collins faced dozens of microphones. She held up the same faded evidence envelope that had remained sealed for more than 3 decades. This case is proof, she said, that time is not always the killer's greatest ally. She looked toward the courthouse steps. Evidence remembers. Science remembers. And the people who refuse to give up remember. Her words spread across newspapers and television broadcasts throughout the country. The Carter investigation became one of the most widely discussed cold case breakthroughs of the year, reminding agencies everywhere that forgotten evidence could still speak. A month later, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation reopened dozens of additional unsolved homicide files collected during the 1980s and early 1990s. Several contained biological evidence that had never been tested using modern DNA methods. Emily Carter's case became the reason those boxes were opened, the reason old photographs were scanned again, the reason forgotten witness statements were read one more time, the reason detectives across the country began asking a simple question: what if we miss something? Back in Ashford, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The yellow ribbons tied around the oak tree remained, not as symbols of hope anymore, but as reminders. Every December, residents gathered beneath that tree carrying candles instead of questions. They spoke Emily's name. They remembered her laughter. They remembered the young waitress whose determination to fight back preserved the microscopic evidence that ultimately identified her killer. 34 years after a cold winter night changed the town forever, justice finally arrived. Not because luck intervened, but because evidence was preserved, investigators refused to forget, and science advanced far enough to give a silent victim one final chance to be heard. Epilogue, fictional story. The courthouse lights went dark long before the people of Ashford found peace. Justice had been delivered, questions had been answered, but no verdict could erase 34 years of loss. Winter returned to Kansas exactly as it had in 1990. Snow settled quietly across empty fields. Wind swept through rows of bare trees. The parking lot behind the old diner looked smaller now. Fresh asphalt covered the cracks where investigators had once searched for footprints beneath floodlights. Only those who remembered could still picture the chaos. Crime scene tape fluttering in the cold. Deputies calling Emily's name into the darkness. Volunteers refusing to leave until sunrise. The diner eventually changed owners. The booths were replaced. The walls repainted. New employees arrived who had never heard the story. Customers drank coffee in the same corner, where Emily had laughed with co-workers only hours before disappearing. Life had continued. It always did. Detective Sarah Collins visited the evidence vault one final time before transferring to another division. She stood quietly in front of the steel shelving where Emily Carter's case had rested for decades. The evidence boxes were no longer marked unsolved. A new label had been attached. Closed by conviction. She rested her hand against the cardboard for a moment, not because the investigation belonged to her, because it belonged to everyone who had refused to abandon it, the retired detectives who preserved every photograph, The forensic technicians who protected fragile samples. The witnesses who answered the phone 30 years later and still remembered one small detail. Justice had not come from one breakthrough. It came from hundreds of people refusing to let time win. Months later, a class of new homicide investigators toured the state crime laboratory. The instructor stopped beside a small display case. Inside rested a faded evidence envelope, an old tire track photograph, and a laboratory report. He spoke only one sentence. Never call a case hopeless. The recruits stood silently. Some wrote notes. Others simply stared at the display. They understood. Somewhere in another evidence room, another forgotten box might already contain tomorrow's answer. Outside, spring slowly returned to fields. Wildflowers covered the roadside where search volunteers had once walked shoulder to shoulder. Drivers passed without knowing the history beneath their tires. But every year, on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, fresh flowers appeared near the old oak tree at the edge of town. No cameras, no speeches, no reporters, only quiet remembrance. People came alone. They stood for a few minutes. Then they left, one by one. The cold case was over. The grief never completely disappeared. Yet neither did hope, because one tiny fragment of DNA had survived 3 decades in silence. Because investigators looked one more time. Because science finally reached a place where truth had been waiting all along. And somewhere, in evidence rooms across the country, thousands of sealed boxes still sat beneath layers of dust, holding stories that had not yet spoken their final words. Author's note, fictional story. Years after the case became part of law enforcement training, Detective Sarah Collins received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature. No explanation. Only one sentence. Thank you for proving that forgotten victims are never truly forgotten. The envelope contained something else. A newspaper clipping from January 1990. The headline announced Emily Carter's disappearance. Across the top, someone had written in blue ink, "She finally came home." Sarah folded the clipping carefully and placed it inside her desk drawer, beside her badge. She never discovered who mailed it. Perhaps it was a retired detective. Perhaps one of the original search volunteers. Perhaps someone who had quietly followed the investigation for decades. It no longer mattered. The message said everything that needed to be said. The Carter investigation soon became required reading at the State Police Academy. New detectives studied every stage of the case. Not because it was perfect, because it wasn't. They examined the overlooked witness statements, the evidence that sat untouched for years, the photographs that gained new meaning only after modern enhancement, the tiny biological sample once considered too small to test. Every mistake became a lesson. Every lesson increased the chance that another family might someday receive answers sooner. Across Kansas, cold case units reopened dozens of forgotten investigations. Shells that had remained untouched for years suddenly came alive. Evidence boxes were carried into laboratories. Old fingerprints were scanned again. Discarded clothing was examined with technologies that did not exist when the crimes occurred. Some cases remained silent. Others slowly began to speak. The Carter case had become more than a conviction. It had become a reminder that justice does not always move quickly, but it can continue moving long after everyone believes it has stopped. Back in Ashford, the old diner hung a small framed photograph near the entrance. It showed the building covered in snow during the winter of 1990. Beneath it rested a simple plaque, dedicated to memory of Emily Carter and to all investigators who never stopped searching. Customers often paused to read it before taking their seats. Many had never lived through those events. Some were visitors passing through town. A few asked employees about the photograph. The answer was always brief. It reminds us that every person matters. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside, seasons continued changing as they always had. Spring painted the fields green. Summer filled the highways with travelers. Autumn covered the sidewalks with golden leaves. Winter returned with quiet snowfall. Time moved forward, yet the story remained, not because it was famous, not because it shocked the nation, but because it proved something investigators never forgot. Evidence can wait. Truth can wait. Justice can wait. But as long as someone is willing to open one more box, read one more witness statement, or test one more forgotten sample, even the oldest mystery may still have one final chance to be solved. End of fictional story. Chapter 1, a new fictional cold case. The town of Blackridge had only one rule. When the siren echoed after midnight, everyone stayed inside. No one remembered who created the rule. Everyone remembered why. On October 14th, 1993, 18-year-old Noah Ellis disappeared while driving home from work along County Road 7. His pickup truck was discovered the following morning with the headlights still on, the driver's door open, and the engine quietly idling until it ran out of fuel. His wallet remained inside. His watch lay on the dashboard. The radio continued playing the same country station. But Noah was gone. Deputies searched the woods for 9 days. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder across muddy fields. Dogs tracked his scent to a narrow bridge over Blackridge Creek. There, the trail stopped. No footprints. No blood. No sign of a struggle. Only a single flashlight resting against the bridge railing. The batteries were still warm. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some believed Noah had run away. Others whispered about an old abandoned quarry hidden deep in the forest. One elderly resident claimed he heard a truck following Noah that night, but heavy rain erased every tire mark before investigators arrived. Weeks became months. The missing person investigation slowly turned into another forgotten file. Boxes filled with photographs disappeared into evidence storage. Witnesses moved away. The bridge remained. Every October, fresh flowers appeared beside the rusted guardrail. No one admitted leaving them there. 32 years later, Detective Ava Brooks reopened the file after discovering an overlooked cassette recording from the original investigation. Most of the tape contained routine interviews. Then, near the end, a frightened witness quietly said something investigators barely noticed in 1993. "I wasn't looking at Noah. I was looking at the truck behind him." The recording ended with static. That single sentence was enough to change everything. The cassette had been sitting inside an evidence box for more than 3 decades. Its plastic case was cracked. The paper label had faded until only the date remained. October 17, 1993. Detective Ava Brooks listened to the recording again. And again, the witness's voice trembled. "I wasn't looking at Noah. I was looking at the truck behind him." The tape clicked. Silence. Then another voice entered the recording. An investigator from 1993. "What kind of truck?" The witness hesitated. I don't know. It was dark, but one headlight looked lower than the other." The interview ended moments later. No follow-up questions. No detailed description. Nothing. Ava frowned. How had investigators ignored that? She pulled the original interview transcript from file. The final page was missing. Someone had typed only. Witness unable to provide useful information. That wasn't true. Not anymore. The next morning, Ava tracked down the witness. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was 68 now and lived alone outside Blackridge. When she showed him the old cassette, he stared at it for a long time before speaking. I wondered if anyone would ever come back. He remembered more than he expected. He had been driving home after finishing a late shift at a paper mill. As he crossed Blackridge Bridge, Noah's pickup passed in the opposite direction. Less than 30 seconds later, another truck followed. It never turned on its high beams. It stayed close. Too close. Ava leaned forward. "Can you describe it?" Daniel closed his eyes. It was a square body pickup. Dark color. The left headlight pointed toward the ditch. And he stopped. What? There was something hanging from the rear view mirror. What was it? I couldn't tell. But it swung every time the truck hit a bump. That detail had never appeared in the case file. Ava immediately requested vehicle registration records from 1993. Thousands of pickups had been registered across the county, but very few had repair reports mentioning a damaged headlight alignment. The list dropped to 43, then to 17, then to 6. 3 owners had died. 1 had moved overseas. Another had sold his truck before Noah disappeared. Only 2 remained. One of them had lived less than 5 miles from Blackridge Bridge. His name appeared nowhere in the original investigation. Not once. Ava circled it with a red pen. Outside, rain began falling against her office window, exactly the way it had on the night Noah vanished. For 32 years, detectives believed the mystery began at the bridge. Ava wasn't so sure anymore. She believed it had begun with the truck following behind. The next morning, Detective Ava Brooks drove to the county records building before sunrise. The basement archives smelled of old paper and dust. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with decades of vehicle registrations, inspection reports, insurance claims, and handwritten maintenance records that had never been digitized. She wasn't looking for Noah Ellis. She was looking for the truck. The first suspect was quickly eliminated. Employment records showed he had been working an overnight shift nearly 200 miles away when Noah disappeared. Payroll logs, security records, and several co-workers confirmed his whereabouts. One name remained: Thomas Granger, 34 years old, in 1993, owned a dark green Chevrolet pickup, worked as a self-employed contractor, lived alone on a farm less than 10 minutes from Blackridge Bridge. Ava opened the original case file again. His name did not appear, not in witness interviews, not in suspect lists, not even in officers' field notes. It was as if investigators had never known he existed. That alone was enough to raise questions. She drove to the old property later that afternoon. The farmhouse still stood, older now, weathered by decades of rain and harsh winters. The barn leaned slightly toward the tree line. The mailbox had been replaced several times, but the gravel driveway remained exactly as it appeared in aerial photographs from the early 1990s. An elderly woman answered the door. She introduced herself as Martha Granger. Thomas had died 6 years earlier after a long illness. Ava offered her condolences before asking permission to discuss the past. Martha hesitated, then quietly nodded. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Most of the conversation centered on ordinary life: the farm, the weather, construction work, family gatherings. Then Ava asked about October 1993. Martha's expression changed. He wasn't home that night. Did he tell you where he was? He said he got a late phone call for an emergency repair. What kind of repair? He never explained. She looked toward the kitchen window. I thought it was strange. Why? He came home just before dawn. He burned his work clothes in the barrel behind the barn. Ava remained perfectly still. What reason did he give? He said diesel fuel had soaked them. Did you believe him? Martha slowly shook her head. No. He looked terrified. After leaving the farmhouse, Ava walked toward the abandoned burned barrel, still sitting behind the barn. Rust covered most of its surface. Tall weeds surrounded it. No one had touched it for years. She requested a forensic excavation. The following morning, crime scene technicians carefully sifted through layers of ash preserved beneath decades of soil. Hours passed. Most of the material consisted of nails, rusted cans, broken glass, and charred wood. Then a technician called everyone over. Inside the ash lay several small metal boot eyelets fused together by intense heat. Nearby rested melted brass zipper teeth, fragments of burned leather, and something else. A silver belt buckle, badly warped but still recognizable. Every item was photographed, packaged, and sent to the laboratory. As Ava watched the evidence disappear into sealed containers, one thought refused to leave her mind. If Thomas Granger had burned those clothes the morning after Noah Ellis disappeared, what exactly had he been trying to destroy? The answer, she suspected, had survived the fire. The laboratory received the burned evidence under maximum forensic precautions. Most investigators expected the fire to have destroyed everything of value. History suggested otherwise. Modern forensic science had recovered DNA from decades-old bones, submerged clothing, and evidence once believed to be hopeless. Fire complicated the process, but it did not always erase it. Forensic examiner Dr. Elena Morris began with the belt buckle. under high magnification. Tiny fragments of fabric remained fused inside the metal where the flames had not reached completely. The fibers were carefully removed. Next came the melted zipper teeth, then the boot eyelets. Every particle of ash was sifted through specialized filters. Hours turned into days. Days became weeks. The first report arrived. No DNA. The second report. No fingerprints. Another week passed. Then Dr. Morris requested that the evidence be examined with a newer microscopic extraction technique designed to recover biological material trapped beneath layers of corrosion. It was a long shot. No one objected. 3 days later, the laboratory called Detective Ava Brooks. We found something. Ava arrived within 40 minutes. Dr. Morris pointed toward a computer monitor displaying a magnified image of the belt buckle. A tiny reddish-brown stain remained sealed beneath a folded section of metal. It wasn't exposed directly to fire. Can you test it? We already have. The room fell silent. The sample was extremely degraded, but enough genetic material survived to develop a partial DNA profile. Not complete. Not yet. Enough to continue. The profile was immediately compared with Noah Ellis's preserved family reference samples. The result came back the following afternoon. The biological material was consistent with Noah Ellis. No one in the laboratory celebrated. Instead, the silence grew heavier. For the first time in 32 years, investigators possessed physical evidence connecting Noah to Thomas Granger's burned clothing. Ava returned to the farmhouse with a search warrant. Every room was photographed, every cabinet examined. Nothing appeared unusual until investigators entered the old workshop behind the barn. Dust covered nearly every surface. Unused tools lined wooden shelves. Against the far wall stood an aging green pickup truck beneath a gray tarp. The tires had long since gone flat. Spider webs stretched between the mirrors and door handles. Registration records confirmed it. The same truck Thomas Granger owned in 1993. Crime scene technicians carefully removed the tarp. The left headlight sat noticeably lower than the right, exactly as Daniel Mercer had described on forgotten cassette tape. Ava walked slowly around the vehicle. Years of dust covered the paint. Then she noticed something else. The rear-view mirror was empty, but a small metal hook remained attached. Something had once hung there. Something that swung as the truck moved down uneven roads. Investigators opened the driver's door. Inside, time had almost stopped. Old maps, a rusted flashlight, work gloves, receipts, cassette tapes scattered beneath the passenger seat. Then, tucked inside the sun visor, Detective Brooks found a folded photograph. It showed Thomas Granger standing beside the truck sometime in the early 1990s. Hanging from the rear-view mirror, a small wooden fishing lure. Exactly the object Daniel remembered moving back and forth in the darkness. One witness, one forgotten tape, one tiny detail. 32 years later, it had led detectives to the truck. And the truck, Ava believed, was about to reveal what happened on the bridge the night Noah Ellis disappeared. Ava stood beside the old pickup long after the forensic team had finished photographing it. The workshop was silent, except for the steady tapping of rain against the metal roof. 32 years. The truck had waited in the dark all that time. Start with the interior. Ava said, crime scene technicians carefully removed the seats. Every bolt was cataloged. Every loose screw was collected. Dust was vacuumed through forensic filters designed to capture microscopic fibers. Nothing was overlooked. Hours passed before one technician called out, "I've got something." Beneath the driver's seat, trapped inside a narrow gap in the rusted floorboard, lay a small brass button. It was badly scratched, but still intact. A faded thread remained attached. The laboratory compared it with photographs taken after Noah Ellis disappeared. His denim jacket had been missing its top button. The shape, the size, the manufacturing marks. Everything matched. Ava closed her eyes for a brief moment. The truck had finally begun to speak. The next discovery came from the truck bed. Using alternate light sources, investigators noticed faint stains invisible to the naked eye. Samples were collected immediately. Most proved useless after decades of exposure. One did not. Hidden beneath layers of chip paint, protected from sunlight and rain, a tiny biological trace remained. The amount was almost impossible to see. Modern forensic methods recovered a partial DNA profile. It was consistent with Noah Ellis. Not enough to answer every question. Enough to prove he had been inside the truck. That single result changed the investigation forever. Until then, detectives believed Noah had disappeared near the bridge. Now, they believed he had left it alive, just not under his own control. That evening, Ava returned to the bridge alone. The river below flowed quietly beneath the fading light. She walked the same stretch of pavement investigators had searched in 1993. She imagined Noah's pickup crossing first, then another truck following only second behind. She stopped halfway across. The old guardrail had been replaced years earlier, but the view remained unchanged. Dense woods, dark water, silence. A cold breeze swept across the bridge. Ava looked toward the abandoned logging road hidden beyond the trees. It was almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. She realized something the original investigators never could. If the second truck had turned onto that road, instead of continuing across the bridge, no passing driver would have noticed. No one would have thought to search there. The following morning, search teams gathered at the entrance to Forgotten Logging Road. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the earth. Cadaver dogs moved slowly through the forest. For hours, nothing happened. Then one of the dogs stopped near a collapsed stone foundation deep beneath overgrown brush. It refused to move. The handler looked at Ava. "I think this is it." For the first time in 32 years, investigators had found a place no one had searched before. The excavation began before sunrise. Heavy machinery remained outside the tree line. Everything beyond that point was done by hand. The foundation belonged to a cabin that had burned decades earlier. Only scattered stones and the outline of its walls remained beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves. Investigators marked the area into 1-meter grids, documenting every inch before removing a single shovel of soil. Hours passed. Nothing. Then a forensic archaeologist uncovered a rusted belt buckle. A few feet away, another technician found fragments of faded blue denim. The digging slowed even further. Every handful of earth was sifted through fine screens. By late afternoon, human skeletal remains began to emerge. Silence settled across the site. No one spoke. The recovery lasted 2 full days. The remains were carefully transported to the State Forensic Laboratory, where anthropologists began a meticulous examination. Dental records provided the first answer. The victim was Noah Ellis. 32 years after he disappeared, his family finally knew where he had been. The cause of death proved harder to determine. Time had erased many details. But several fractures to the skull showed clear signs of blunt force trauma occurring around the time of death. Nearby, investigators recovered a rusted length of steel pipe buried beneath collapsed roofing timber. Though badly corroded, traces of old blood remained inside protected areas of the metal. The laboratory compared the DNA. The profile was consistent with Noah. Detective Ava Brooks spread the evidence across the conference table. The truck, the brass button, the DNA beneath the truck bed, the witness statement, the fishing lure, the abandoned cabin, the steel pipe. Each piece fit together. Not perfectly, but enough to reveal the outline of what had happened. She believed Thomas Granger forced Noah into the truck near the bridge after a confrontation. Instead of leaving the area, he drove down the abandoned logging road to the deserted cabin, believing no one would ever think to search there. What happened inside remained known only to the 2 men. One never returned. The other carried the secret for the rest of his life. Ava closed the final case folder. Outside her office window, rain tapped softly against the glass, just as it had on the night Noah vanished. 32 years earlier, investigators searched for a missing young man. Now they had found him. The mystery had not disappeared. It had simply waited for someone willing to look one place farther than everyone else. The discovery of Noah Ellis brought relief. It did not bring closure. Detective Ava Brooks knew the difference. Finding a victim answered one question. It often created 10 more. Why had Thomas Granger chosen the abandoned cabin? Had he acted alone? Why had Noah been followed that night? The evidence suggested a confrontation, but not a planned abduction. Something had happened between the bridge and the cabin. Something no report from 1993 could explain. Ava returned to the workshop one final time. Most investigators believed they had collected everything worth preserving. She wasn't convinced. Experience had taught her that old crime scenes rarely surrendered every secret at once. She stood inside the truck again. The driver's seat had been removed. The floorboards were exposed. She looked toward the passenger door. It was a tiny detail, easy to miss. A forensic technician removed the panel carefully. A folded piece of paper slid onto the floor. Everyone froze. The paper was brittle, water-stained, barely holding together. Conservators unfolded it one layer at a time. It wasn't a letter. It was a map, a hand-drawn map. Black Ridge Bridge, the logging road, the abandoned cabin, and farther north, a location marked only with a small black X. No label, no explanation, just the X. Ava compared it with modern satellite images. The marked location lay deep inside state forest, nearly 5 miles from the cabin. No hiking trails reached it. No roads remained open. If someone had hidden something there in 1993, it might still be waiting. The search team entered the forest 2 days later. Dense trees blocked the sunlight. The old logging paths had long disappeared beneath undergrowth. Using the map and GPS, they slowly worked toward the marked location. After several hours, they reached a small clearing. Nothing stood there except an enormous oak tree split by lightning years earlier. The ground appeared undisturbed. Cadaver dogs found nothing. Metal detectors remained silent. Some investigators believed the map led nowhere. Ava kept looking. She walked around the fallen trunk once. Then again, near one exposed root, she noticed several stones arranged in an almost perfect circle. Nature rarely stacked rocks so neatly. Excavation began. Only 30 centimeters below the surface, a rusted military ammunition box emerged from the soil. Its hinges had almost completely corroded away. Inside lay several old photographs, a pocket notebook wrapped in oilcloth, and a cassette tape labeled in faded black marker. October 14th, 1993. No one touched the tape. Ava stared at it in silence. If it still played. Someone's voice from a night Noah disappeared had been waiting beneath that oak tree for more than 30 years. The cassette was transported to the State Forensic Audio Laboratory under controlled conditions. No one attempted to play it immediately. Magnetic tape that old could tear apart with a single pass through an ordinary recorder. An audio preservation specialist spent 2 days cleaning the shell, stabilizing the reels, and repairing a cracked pressure pad before the tape ever touched the playback machine. Detective Ava Brooks stood behind the glass as the reels began to turn. At first, only static. A long hiss, then the faint sound of wind. Someone was breathing heavily. Footsteps crunched across wet leaves. A truck door slammed. Several seconds passed before a man's voice broke the silence. You weren't supposed to see it. The room froze. Another voice answered. Younger. Shaken. It was almost certainly Noah Ellis. I won't tell anyone. You have my word. The recording crackled. Rain struck what sounded like a vehicle roof. Another voice, deeper, angrier, cut through the static. It's too late for promises. A loud impact followed. Then another. The microphone fell sideways, scraping against gravel. The audio became muffled. For nearly 30 seconds, only shouting could be heard. The words were impossible to understand. Then Noah's voice returned. We can fix this. Another heavy blow. Silence. Only the rain remained. The tape continued recording for several more minutes. An engine started. 2 vehicle doors closed. 1 truck drove away. The second engine never started. The recording ended with a sharp click. Nobody in the laboratory spoke. It wasn't a complete account of what happened that night, but it transformed the investigation. The confrontation had not begun at the cabin. It had begun before either man left the bridge. Ava replayed the recording half a dozen times. One detail kept pulling at her attention. The first sentence. You weren't supposed to see it. See what? That question became the center of the investigation. Detectives searched county records from the weeks leading up to Noah's disappearance. Construction permits, property disputes, insurance claims, logging contracts, old newspaper clippings. On the third day, an intern reviewing archive planning documents found a thin folder-marked county route expansion, confidential draft. Inside was a survey map of the Black Ridge Forest. The proposed highway would cross directly through several privately owned parcels, including land belonging to Thomas Granger. More importantly, handwritten notes in the margin referred to an unauthorized dumping site discovered during preliminary inspections. The location matched the abandoned cabin. Environmental investigators had planned another inspection the following week. That inspection never happened. The project was quietly delayed after Noah disappeared. Ava spread the survey map beside the hand-drawn map recovered from the ammunition box. The two locations overlapped perfectly. She finally understood why the bridge mattered, why the cabin mattered, why Noah had been followed. He hadn't stumbled into a random encounter. He had seen something he was never meant to witness. And somewhere in the forgotten records of Black Ridge, the final piece of that secret was still waiting to be uncovered. Detective Ava Brooks ordered every document connected to the abandoned cabin brought into the incident room. Most were routine. Property surveys, tax assessments, boundary disputes dating back decades. Then one folder caught her attention. It had never been indexed. The cover simply read, Inspection deferred, October 1993. Inside was a field notebook belonging to an environmental inspector named Harold Benton. His final entry had been written 2 days before Noah disappeared. Observed several unmarked drums partially buried behind the abandoned cabin. Strong chemical odor. Returning next week with state officials. There was no next entry. Harold retired unexpectedly less than a year later. The follow-up inspection never happened. Ava located him living in a small retirement community nearly 3 hours away. His memory was surprisingly sharp. I never forgot that place, he said. What did you find? I wasn't sure. But someone had buried dozens of industrial barrels. Were they opened? No. I left them exactly where they were. He paused before continuing. When I drove away, I noticed a green pickup watching me from the trees. Ava showed him a photograph of Thomas Granger. Harold studied it for several seconds, then quietly nodded. I can't swear to it, but that's the face I remember. The interview ended with one final question. Did you tell anyone? I filed a report. It disappeared. Back in Black Ridge, excavation teams returned to the cabin. Ground-penetrating radar identified several large metal objects buried beneath nearly 2 meters of soil. Heavy equipment removed the upper layers while forensic archaeologists supervised every movement. The first barrel appeared before noon. Then another. Each carried faded industrial markings from a manufacturing plant that had closed decades earlier. State environmental officials confirmed the contents were hazardous waste that had been dumped illegally sometime in the early 1990s. The discovery changed the entire theory of the case. Noah Ellis may never have been the intended target. He may have witnessed the dumping operation by chance while driving home. A witness, nothing more, but a witness was enough. Detective search company records connected to the abandoned barrels. Most had been destroyed after the factory declared bankruptcy. One payroll ledger survived. Thomas Granger's name appeared repeatedly, not as a factory employee, as an independent hauling contractor. The timeline fit perfectly. He had access to trucks. He knew the back roads. He knew the abandoned cabin. He knew exactly where the barrels had been hidden. Standing beside the excavation, Ava looked across the clearing where the old cabin once stood. For 32 years, everyone believed the mystery centered on one missing man. Now it appeared Noah had stumbled onto something much larger, an operation that someone had been desperate to keep buried. The truth had been hidden beneath the forest floor all along. And with every barrel lifted from the earth, another piece of that long-buried secret finally came into the light. Federal environmental investigators arrived in Black Ridge within 48 hours. What had begun as a decades-old missing person case was now expanding into something far larger. Each recovered barrel received its own identification number. The soil surrounding every burial site was sampled. Water from nearby streams was collected. Forensic chemists compared the contents against manufacturing records from the early 1990s. The results were disturbing. Several chemicals had never been authorized for disposal at the abandoned cabin. Someone had intentionally concealed them. Detective Ava Brooks no longer believed Thomas Granger had acted alone. One man could hide evidence. One man could commit murder. But burying dozens of industrial drums over multiple nights required equipment, planning, and help. She reopened every business record connected to the hauling contracts. Invoices, fuel receipts, maintenance logs, delivery schedules. Most appeared ordinary. One invoice did not. It listed a delivery to a construction site that had never existed. The address pointed directly to the abandoned logging road. Payment had been approved. Fuel had been charged. The shipment was marked complete. Yet no construction permit had ever been issued for that location. Someone had created a fake job to hide repeated trips into the forest. Investigators traced the paperwork to a small transportation company that dissolved in 1995. Most employee records were gone. A few payroll files survived. Among the names was another contractor who had worked alongside Thomas Granger throughout the summer and fall of 1993. Unlike Granger, he was still alive. His name was Samuel Harlan, 72 years old, living quietly in a neighboring county. Ava drove there the following morning. Harlan answered the door with a cane in one hand and a newspaper tucked beneath his arm. When she introduced herself, his expression changed almost immediately. Not surprise, recognition. He knew exactly why she had come. "I've been expecting this day," he said softly. Inside the small living room, framed photographs covered the walls. Fishing trips, family gatherings, grandchildren, an ordinary life built over 3 decades. Ava placed a recovered map on the coffee table, then the photograph of the green pickup. Finally, the image of the excavation at the cabin. Harlan stared at each one without speaking. After several minutes, he took a slow breath. "We thought nobody would ever find that place." Ava remained silent. He continued. "It started with money. The company wanted the waste gone. Legal disposal cost too much, so they paid contractors to make it disappear." He looked toward the window. Thomas knew every back road in the county. He found the cabin, and nobody asked questions. "What happened to Noah Ellis?" Ava asked. Harlan closed his eyes. "He wasn't looking for us. He was just driving home. He stopped because one of the trucks was blocking the road. He saw the barrels. He saw our faces. The room fell quiet. We panicked." His voice began to shake. Thomas followed him. "I told him to let the kid go. He wouldn't listen. I drove away. I never saw Noah alive again." Ava studied him carefully. "You never told anyone?" "I was a coward. I convinced myself the truth would die with Thomas." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the hills surrounding Black Ridge. For 32 years, the case had appeared to be an isolated disappearance. Now it looked like something entirely different. A killing born not from chance alone, but from a desperate attempt to hide a much larger crime. And for the first time since Noah Ellis vanished into the rain, another living witness had finally broken decades of silence. Samuel Harlan agreed to provide a formal statement the following morning. Detective Ava Brooks insisted every word be video recorded. No interruptions. No leading questions. Just the truth as he remembered it. The interview began at 9:03 a.m. Harlan's voice was steady at first. He described the hauling contracts, the late-night deliveries, and the abandoned cabin that became an illegal dumping site. The company saved thousands of dollars by avoiding proper disposal fees. Drivers were paid in cash. Records were altered. False invoices covered every trip into the forest. Then the conversation reached October 14th, 1993. Harlan's breathing slowed. We finished unloading just after 11. There were 4 barrels left. Thomas heard an engine. Through the trees, they saw Noah's pickup approaching along the logging road. He stopped because he thought we needed help. According to Harlan, Noah stepped out of his truck carrying a flashlight. He called out, "Everything okay?" Thomas answered before anyone else could speak. Wrong place, wrong time. At first, the conversation remained calm. Thomas claimed they were repairing equipment. Noah looked toward the open truck bed. One of the steel drums had rolled onto its side. Dark liquid leaked slowly into the dirt. Noah walked closer. He read the warning label. Hazardous material. He looked back at the men. "I'm calling this in." Harlan lowered his head. I knew we were finished. He claimed he pleaded with Thomas to let Noah leave. Thomas refused. Instead, he climbed into his pickup and followed Noah as the young man drove away. I never chased him. I stayed behind. I kept telling myself he'd scare the kid. I kept telling myself nobody was going to die. He never saw Thomas again that night. The following morning, Thomas returned alone. His clothes were soaked from the rain. His hands shook so badly he could barely light a cigarette. He looked at me once. Then he said, "It's handled." Those 2 words haunted Harlan for the next 32 years. He never asked another question. He never returned to the cabin. He accepted the money. He buried the memory. When the interview ended, Detective Brooks switched off the recorder but remained seated. The room was silent. Finally, she asked one final question. "Why tell the truth now?" Harlan stared through the window for several seconds. Because every year I drove past that bridge. Every year. And every year I saw flowers. I realized somebody was still waiting for Noah to come home. He swallowed hard. I was the only person left who could help bring him back. The statement did not erase what had happened. It did not undo decades of grief. But it filled in the final missing hours of Noah Ellis's life. For the first time, investigators could reconstruct the entire sequence of events. From the moment Noah turned onto the logging road to the moment Thomas Granger followed him into the darkness. When Detective Ava Brooks walked out of the interview room, rain had begun falling once again. She looked toward the gray sky above Blackridge. The investigation that began with forgotten cassette tape had uncovered illegal dumping, corruption, buried evidence, a hidden body, and a truth that had survived more than 3 decades beneath layers of silence. Some mysteries end with a single clue. This one ended because one frightened witness finally decided that the weight of the truth was lighter than the burden of keeping it hidden. Months after Samuel Harlan's statement, the Blackridge investigation officially closed, but its impact continued to spread far beyond the county line. State prosecutors filed environmental crime charges against the dissolved company's surviving executives wherever evidence still supported prosecution. Former employees were interviewed. Old financial records were reconstructed from bank archives. Insurance files, freight manifests, and tax documents filled entire storage rooms. One forgotten homicide investigation had exposed decades of corporate fraud. Detective Ava Brooks never considered that the greatest discovery, for her, the most important day, came quietly. No television cameras, no reporters, no courtroom, only Noah Ellis's family standing together beneath a cloudy autumn sky as his remains were finally laid to rest in the cemetery overlooking Blackridge. The service lasted less than an hour. Friends who had once searched the woods as teenagers now stood with gray hair and grandchildren beside them. Several retired deputies attended in uniform. So did volunteers who had walked those muddy fields 32 years earlier, carrying flashlights and hope. The pastor spoke softly. Time delayed the truth. It did not defeat it. After the ceremony ended, Noah's mother remained beside the grave long after everyone else had left. Detective Brooks approached quietly. "I wish we could have found him sooner." Noah's mother smiled through tears. "So do I." She looked across the rows of headstones. "But he isn't missing anymore." Those words stayed with Ava for weeks. Back at headquarters, she carried the original evidence box into the archive herself. The cardboard looked exactly as it had on the day she first opened it. Only one thing had changed. The label, the red stamp reading active cold case, had been removed. In its place was a simple white tag. Resolved, she slid the box onto the shelf. For a moment, she simply stood there. Every photograph, every interview, every forgotten note, every overlooked clue, they had all been waiting for someone willing to read them one more time. Before leaving the archive, Ava paused in front of dozens of other boxes stacked beside Noah's case. Some were older. Some had been untouched for even longer. Each carried the name of someone whose family was still waiting. She ran her fingers across the faded case numbers. One box caught her attention. No photograph were attached, only a handwritten note. Missing since August 1987. Ava picked it up. The cardboard was as dusty as Noah's had been. She carried it to her desk. Outside, evening settled over Blackridge. Rain tapped softly against the windows, sounding almost identical to the recording recovered from beneath the old oak tree. Ava opened the first folder. A black and white photograph slid onto the desk. On the back, someone had written 5 words in blue ink. Start with the abandoned lighthouse. She looked toward the evidence room door. Another forgotten mystery had just begun. The lighthouse had been abandoned for almost 20 years. It stood alone on the edge of Blackridge Lake, its white paint worn away by wind and winter, its lantern room shattered by storms that no one bothered to repair. Children avoided it. Fishermen never tied their boats to the broken dock. The place had become part of local folklore, passed from one generation to the next in whispers rather than facts. Detective Ava Brooks never believed in ghost stories. She believed in people. People lied. People forgot. People buried secrets. Buildings simply kept them. She unlocked the rusted chain across the entrance and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The hinges groaned. Dust drifted through the narrow beam of her flashlight. Every step echoed upward through the spiral staircase. The air smelled of damp wood and old stone. Someone had been there recently, not because of footprints, because the dust wasn't even. Thin streaks crossed the floor where something heavy had been dragged only weeks earlier. Ava knelt beside one of the marks. It led toward a storage room beneath the staircase. The door refused to open. Years of moisture had swollen the frame. A forensic technician forced it loose with a pry bar. Inside sat broken furniture, rusted tools, cracked lantern glass, and dozens of weather-damaged crates stacked against the far wall. Nothing looked valuable, until Ava noticed a leather journal tucked beneath a collapsed shelf. Its cover had almost disintegrated. Most pages were ruined by water. Only a handful remained readable. The entries described routine maintenance of the lighthouse through the early 1980s. Weather conditions, supply deliveries, passing boats. Then, without warning, the handwriting changed. The final pages were written in a hurry. Someone keeps coming here after dark. They're using the basement. If anything happens to me, check below the old fuel room. The entry stopped. No signature. No explanation. Only silence. Ava closed the journal slowly. The lighthouse suddenly felt much larger than before. She turned toward the narrow hallway, leading beneath the building. Cold air drifted upward through the darkness. Somewhere below, water echoed softly against stone. She switched on another flashlight. Let's see what they wanted hidden. Without another word, she stepped into the darkness beneath the lighthouse, following a secret that had been waiting for decades. The passage beneath the lighthouse narrowed with every step. Stone walls, slick with moisture, pressed in from both sides. Rusted pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping steadily into shallow pools that reflected the beams of the investigators' flashlights. The air was cold enough that every breath lingered. Detective Ava Brooks stopped. Listen. The team stood perfectly still. At first, nothing. Then, a faint metallic sound. Not loud, just a slow, rhythmic tapping somewhere deeper underground. One of the forensic technicians looked toward the darkness. Water? Ava shook her head. No, the timing's too regular. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. They continued forward. The corridor ended at a thick steel door hidden behind collapsed wooden shelving. Layers of rust covered its surface. but the hinges appeared strangely clean. Someone had opened it. Recently, crime scene photographers documented every angle before the lock was cut. The heavy door creaked inward. A large underground chamber stretched beyond it. Shelves lined the walls. Most had collapsed long ago. Broken crates littered the floor. Glass bottles, old ropes, navigation charts. Everything appeared abandoned. Then Ava noticed something different. One section of the floor was almost completely free of dust. Someone had swept it. She knelt and examined the concrete. Fine scratches crossed the surface in parallel lines. Something heavy had been moved repeatedly. A rectangular metal cabinet stood against the wall. It looked original to the lighthouse. The doors were unlocked. Inside, nothing. No equipment. No supplies. Only an empty compartment. Too empty. Ava tapped the back wall with her flashlight. Solid. Solid again. Then, a hollow echo. She smiled. There's another space behind this. The technicians measured the cabinet. Its exterior dimensions were far larger than the interior. A hidden compartment. Using a fiber optic camera, they located a concealed latch inside the frame. The false panel slowly swung open. Behind it rested a narrow cavity no wider than a closet. Inside were 3 weatherproof storage cases. Each was carefully sealed. No names, no labels, no markings. The first case contained dozens of rolls of undeveloped film. The second held handwritten notebooks wrapped in oilcloth. The third was locked, heavier than the others. No one forced it open inside the chamber. Evidence seals were applied immediately. Everything would be examined under laboratory conditions. As the team prepared to leave, Ava swept her flashlight across the ceiling. A fresh footprint marked the dusty beam above the hidden compartment. Someone had climbed up there. Not years ago. Recently. Very recently. Whoever had used the lighthouse hadn't expected detectives to discover the secret room. And if they realized the hiding place had been found, they might already be trying to recover whatever remained hidden inside those mysterious cases. Outside, the sun was setting across Blackridge Lake. The lighthouse cast a long shadow over the water. For decades it had looked abandoned. Now Ava knew better. Some secrets had never been left behind. They had simply been waiting for someone brave enough to open the right door. The evidence cases arrived at the forensic archive before midnight. Detective Ava Brooks watched as each seal was photographed, logged, and opened under bright laboratory lights. Years of experience had taught her not to expect dramatic discoveries. Most hidden collections contained old receipts, damaged photographs, or personal belongings that raised more questions than answers. This collection felt different. The first weatherproof case held nearly 40 rolls of undeveloped film. Despite their age, several had remained protected from moisture. Imaging specialists believed there was still a chance to recover photographs using modern restoration techniques. The second case contained 6 notebooks. Every page had been written in the same careful handwriting found in the journal beneath the lighthouse. No names, no dates on the covers, only numbered volumes. Ava opened the first notebook. The opening pages described routine maintenance around Blackridge Lake, water levels, storm damage, supply deliveries. Then the entries slowly changed. The writer began documenting unfamiliar vehicles arriving after dark, license plate numbers, descriptions of drivers, dates, times. Each observation became more detailed. Green pickup. Arrived 11:42 p.m., left 12:31 a.m. White delivery van. No company markings. 2 men unloaded wooden crates into the basement. The notebooks read less like a diary and more like surveillance. Whoever wrote them had been watching the lighthouse for years. The third evidence case took much longer to open. Its lock had corroded shut. After nearly an hour of careful work, the lid finally lifted. Inside lay a portable cassette recorder wrapped in cloth. Beside it rested a bundle of labeled audio tapes. Each tape carried a handwritten date. Several were from 1986. The final tape was labeled only with 2 words. Do not erase. Ava looked at the recorder. If it still works. The audio specialist nodded. We won't use the original. He carefully removed the tape and placed it into a modern preservation system designed to capture every magnetic trace without damaging the recording. The reels began turning. Static filled the room. Then came the sound of waves striking the lighthouse foundation. A distant foghorn. Footsteps. Someone whispered. Another voice answered. The conversation was too faint to understand. Technicians immediately began digital enhancement. Minute by minute, the voices became clearer. Not clear enough to identify every word. Clear enough to recognize one sentence. They're storing everything below until the shipment moves north. The room fell silent. The notebooks, the photographs, the hidden chamber, now the recordings. None of it looked accidental. Someone had used the abandoned lighthouse as a secret meeting place long after the public believed it had been deserted. Ava closed the notebook and looked toward the dark window overlooking Blackridge Lake. Whoever had written these journals hadn't simply recorded history. They had left behind a trail. And somewhere beyond the shoreline, that trail was leading toward a secret that was still waiting to be uncovered. Night settled over Blackridge Lake, without a single light crossing the water. Detective Ava Brooks remained alone in the evidence room long after everyone else had gone home. The enhanced recording played softly through her headphones. Waves, wind, footsteps. Then, buried beneath the noise, another sound emerged. A train whistle. She stopped the recording, played it again. The whistle came exactly 12 seconds after the voice mentioned the shipment moving north. Blackridge no longer had an active railway. Not today. But in 1987, a freight line had passed less than 2 miles east of the lighthouse before it was abandoned. Ava spread an old railroad map across her desk. The line ended at a forgotten freight warehouse beside the river. The building had been empty for decades. At least, that was the official record. The following morning, she drove there alone. The warehouse stood exactly where the map promised. Broken windows, collapsed loading docks, rusted steel doors hanging from bent hinges. Nature had slowly reclaimed the property. Inside, sunlight slipped through holes in the roof. Dust floated through the air. Thousands of footprints should have covered the floor after 30 years. Instead, the concrete remained strangely clean near the northern wall. Someone had swept it. Ava followed the cleared path. It stopped in an enormous wooden crate. Empty. Too light. She pushed aside. Hidden beneath was a square steel hatch built into the concrete. No markings. No lock. Only a heavy iron handle. She pulled. The hatch refused to move. Years of rust had sealed it shut. Using a steel bar, she forced it open a few centimeters. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. A narrow staircase disappeared underground. She switched on her flashlight and descended slowly. The chamber beneath the warehouse was much larger than she expected. Brick walls, concrete pillars, old electrical wiring, stacks of rotten wooden pallets. Along one wall stood dozens of empty shelves coated with dust. On another wall, someone had painted a simple compass. Its north arrow pointed toward a narrow tunnel. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person. Ava followed it. 50 meters later, it ended at a steel door. Unlike everything else underground, this door looked new. Fresh hinges, fresh paint. Someone had installed it within the last few years. She rested one hand against the cold metal. From the other side came the faint sound of voices. Not echoes, real voices. Someone was still using the forgotten tunnels beneath Blackridge. Ava quietly stepped back, reached for a radio, and whispered only 4 words. "I found something alive." Ava released the radio button and waited. No response. The tunnel walls were too thick. The signal could not escape the maze beneath the warehouse. She tried again. Only static. She was alone. The voices beyond the steel door grew slightly louder. 2 people, maybe 3. One laughed. Another slid something heavy across a concrete floor. Ava switched off her flashlight and allowed her eyes to adjust to the darkness. A narrow strip of light leaked from beneath the door. She crouched, carefully, slowly. The gap was only a few millimeters high, but was enough to reveal moving shadows. Someone walked past carrying a lantern. Another figure unfolded what looked like a large paper map across a table. The words were impossible to hear clearly. Then a single phrase reached her. Before sunrise. Ava memorized it. Footsteps approached. She backed silently into the tunnel, just as the steel door opened. A tall man stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and looked down the empty passage. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of a dark cap. For nearly a minute, he stood perfectly still, listening. The cigarette glowed orange in the darkness. Finally, he crushed it beneath his boot and disappeared back inside. The lock clicked. Ava waited another 5 minutes before moving. She picked up the discarded cigarette, still warm. Using an evidence envelope from her jacket pocket, she sealed it immediately. Fresh DNA, fresh fingerprints. For the first time, the investigation was no longer chasing ghosts from decades ago. Someone connected to the mystery was alive. She retreated through the tunnel without making a sound. When she finally reached the warehouse, her radio signal returned. "Dispatch, this is Brooks." Her voice remained calm. "I need backup." Quiet response only. No lights. No sirens. Within 20 minutes, unmarked vehicles surrounded the abandoned warehouse from a distance. Officers moved into position through the trees. No one entered. No one wanted to alert the people below. A tactical team descended the staircase exactly as Ava had described. The tunnel was empty. The steel door remained closed. On her signal, a hydraulic spreader forced the lock apart. The team rushed inside. Silence. The room was empty. Tables remained. Maps covered the walls. Lanterns were still burning. Coffee inside metal cups was warm. Whoever had been there had escaped only moments earlier. A second tunnel had been concealed behind a movable shelving unit. It led toward the river. Outside, officers searched the shoreline until dawn. No suspects were found. But the underground room revealed something even more valuable. Pinned across one wall was an enormous map of Blackridge and the surrounding counties. Dozens of locations were marked with red circles. Some matched places Ava already knew. The abandoned lighthouse, the old warehouse, the logging road, the burned cabin. Others had never appeared in any investigation. In the center of the map, written in thick black marker, were 4 words. Everything begins at Raven Hill. Ava stared at the message for several seconds. The people she had almost caught were gone, but they had made one mistake. In their hurry to escape, they had left behind the next destination. The hunt had just entered a new chapter. Dawn broke over Blackridge beneath a blanket of low gray clouds. The tactical team remained inside the underground chamber long after the search ended. Every map, notebook, coffee cup, lantern, and chair was photographed exactly where it had been found before anyone touched the thing. Detective Ava Brooks ignored the obvious clues. She searched for the mistakes. People who planned carefully rarely left evidence behind. People forced to flee did. A forensic examiner called her over to the largest table in the room. "What do you see?" Ava leaned closer. At first, nothing. Just scratches across the wooden surface. Then she tilted her flashlight. Hundreds of tiny indentations became visible. Someone had written on a sheet of paper resting on the table, pressing hard enough to leave impressions in the wood beneath. Crime scene technicians dusted the surface with graphite powder. Slowly, faint words emerged. Not complete sentences. Fragments. Meeting. Friday. Raven Hill. North entrance. One line stood out more clearly than the rest. Don't bring phones. Ava photographed every mark before the table was transported for laboratory examination. Meanwhile, another technician examined the maps pinned to the wall. Each red circle contained a handwritten number. 1, 3, 8, 12. None appeared random. Ava compared them with county property records. Within an hour, a pattern emerged. Every number location had once belonged to the same development company that dissolved in the early 1990s. Warehouses, storage yards, maintenance buildings, construction depots. On paper, they were unrelated. In reality, They form a chain stretching across 3 counties. Someone had built a network of forgotten places long before anyone realized they existed. By late afternoon, investigators reached Raven Hill. It wasn't a town. It wasn't even marked on modern maps. Only an abandoned quarry surrounded by dense forest. The entrance road had nearly disappeared beneath weeds and fallen branches. The tactical commander raised a hand. Everyone stopped. Fresh tire tracks crossed the mud. 2 vehicles. Recent. No more than a day old. Ava crouched beside them. Heavy pickup tires. 1 larger SUV. Both had entered. Neither had left. The team advanced quietly. The quarry opened into a massive bowl of broken stone. Rusted excavation equipment stood frozen where workers had abandoned it decades earlier. Wind echoed through the cliffs. Nothing moved. Then one officer pointed toward the far side of the quarry. A faint ribbon of smoke rose above the trees. Not wildfire. Campfire. Someone was there. The officer spread out along the rock ledges. No sirens. No shouting. Only the sound of boots crunching over loose gravel. As Ava reached the edge of the clearing, she saw an old maintenance shack hidden among the pines. Its chimney still produced thin gray smoke. The front door stood slightly open. A kettle rested over a fire outside, still steaming. Someone had left in a hurry. Inside the shack, the room was almost empty. A wooden table, 3 folding chairs, a battery-powered lantern, and on the wall, attached with a single nail, hung a recent photograph. It showed Detective Ava Brooks standing outside the abandoned lighthouse 3 days earlier. Someone had been watching her, long before she realized she was hunting them. She slowly removed the photograph from the wall. On the back, written in neat black ink, were 6 chilling words. "You're finally asking the right questions." A chill settled over the room, not because of the temperature, because the photograph had been taken from a distance no ordinary passerby could have reached unnoticed. Someone had been watching Detective Ava Brooks for days, perhaps weeks. She turned the photograph over once more. There was nothing else written on it. No signature. No date. Just those 6 words. "You're finally asking the right questions." The tactical team swept the maintenance shack from floor to ceiling. No hidden compartments. No fingerprints worth recovering. Every surface had been carefully wiped. Whoever had occupied the shack understood forensic investigation. That realization disturbed Ava more than anything else. This was no random group hiding in abandoned buildings. Someone was staying 1 step ahead. Outside, a young officer called her over. Fresh footprints. 3 distinct sets. They led away from the shack toward the eastern cliffs. The team followed cautiously. The trail ended at an overlook where the quarry dropped nearly 100 feet. At first glance, there was nowhere else to go. Then Ava noticed a steel cable disappearing over the edge. A concealed freight platform. Old, weathered, large enough to carry equipment from a quarry floor decades earlier. The mechanism no longer worked, but the cable showed fresh wear. Someone had used it recently. Engineers secured new climbing lines while tactical officers descended into the quarry basin below. The lower level had remained hidden from above by thick pine trees. What looked abandoned from the rim concealed an entirely different landscape beneath. An old service road, several concrete foundations, the remains of storage sheds, and fresh tire tracks winding toward a tunnel carved into the rock face. The tunnel entrance had been blocked with fallen timber years before, or so it appeared. Closer inspection revealed the logs had been arranged deliberately, a disguise. Behind them stood reinforced steel doors. Ava smiled quietly. They've done this before. The barricade was removed piece by piece. No alarms, no movement. The doors opened into a surprisingly modern corridor. Battery-powered emergency lights glowed faintly along the walls. Someone had installed them within the last few years. The air smelled clean. Ventilation fans hummed somewhere deeper inside the tunnel. This place wasn't abandoned. It was maintained. Room after room appeared empty. Simple bunks, metal lockers, shelves stacked with canned food, portable generators, medical supplies. Nothing illegal. Nothing that explained the decades of secrecy. Then Ava entered the final room. Unlike the others, this one contained only a single table. On the table rested a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in black ink, was her name, Detective Ava Brooks. No one touched it. The bomb squad examined the envelope first. No explosives, no chemicals, only paper. After receiving clearance, Ava carefully opened it. Inside was a typed letter. It contained only one paragraph. You have uncovered fragments, not the whole story. Noah Ellis was never our target. Thomas Granger believed silence could protect everyone involved. He was wrong. The truth did not disappear with him. If you want the answer that explains everything, stop searching for people. Start searching for the ledger. There was no signature, only a small symbol printed beneath the final sentence. A simple circle divided by a single vertical line. No one in the room recognized it. Ava folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. For months she had believed she was chasing a killer. Now she realized she might be chasing something much larger. A name, a network, a ledger that someone had spent more than 30 years protecting. Somewhere in Blackridge, hidden behind ordinary lives of forgotten places, the final record still existed, and whoever possessed it knew she was getting closer. The symbol refused to leave Ava's mind. A circle, one vertical line, simple enough to be meaningless, deliberate enough to be remembered. She pinned a copy of the letter beside the growing evidence board in her office. Maps covered one wall. Photographs filled another. Strings connected abandoned locations that, months earlier, had appeared unrelated. The bridge, the cabin, the warehouse, the lighthouse, the quarry. Every path eventually crossed the same invisible line. Someone had been building a network of hidden places long before Noah Ellis disappeared. The question was no longer where. It was why. For 3 straight days, analysts searched historical records for the symbol. Nothing. Corporate logos, survey markers, railroad emblems, old utility companies. No match. Late on the 4th evening, an archivist in the county museum called Ava. I think I've seen it before. The symbol wasn't a company logo. It wasn't a government seal. It appeared in the margin of several engineering blueprints drawn during construction of Blackridge Dam in the late 1960s. Only certain pages carried it. Pages showing maintenance tunnels that had never appeared on the public versions of plans. Ava drove to the museum immediately. The archivist spread the aging blueprints across a conservation table. Most of the drawings matched the dam exactly. One section did not. A narrow corridor disappeared behind a reinforced wall. No entrance. No exit. Only the symbol. Where does this lead? Ava asked. The archivist shook his head. Those pages were removed before the final plans were approved. Who removed them? There isn't a record. Ava photographed every sheet. Outside, rain had begun falling once again, washing across the empty streets of Blackridge. Back at headquarters, she overlaid the original construction drawings with modern satellite imagery. The hidden corridor pointed toward a hillside overlooking the lake, not the dam itself. An old maintenance building that had officially been abandoned for more than 25 years. By dawn, a small investigative team arrived at the site. The concrete structure looked forgotten. Broken windows, a collapsed roof. Rust covered every exposed surface. Nature had nearly erased it. Inside, however, the dust told a different story. Fresh footprints crossed the floor. A single lantern sat on an overturned crate. Its fuel reservoir was still warm. Someone had left only hours earlier. Ava followed the footprints to the rear wall. There, beneath layers of peeling paint, she found the symbol again. The circle. The vertical line. This time it had been carved directly into the concrete. She ran her fingers across the grooves. They were clean, recently cut, not decades old. A narrow crack beside the carving caught her attention. She pressed against the wall. Nothing happened. Then one of the officers noticed a loose metal pipe near the floor. He rotated it slowly. A deep mechanical click echoed through the building. The wall shifted only a few centimeters before stopping. Dust poured from the ceiling. Cold air drifted through the opening. Beyond it lay complete darkness. Ava lifted her flashlight. The beam disappeared into a passage that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the hillside. No one spoke. The hidden corridor had remained sealed for decades. Yet someone had reopened it. And if the anonymous letter was telling the truth, the ledger and the answers everyone had been chasing might finally be somewhere beyond that silent doorway. Ava waited until the structural engineers completed their inspection. The hidden corridor was stable enough to enter, but only with caution. Emergency lighting was installed at the entrance. A safety line stretched along the first 100 meters. Then the team stepped into the darkness. The air grew noticeably colder. Concrete walls gradually gave way to solid rock, suggesting the passage had been expanded from an older natural tunnel. Every 20 feet, faded numbers had been painted on the walls. 17, 18, 19. None of them matched any official engineering plans. Someone had created a numbering system known only to those who used the passage. The corridor ended at a reinforced steel gate. Unlike the others, this one stood open, not forced. Open, recently. A thin layer of dust covered the floor, interrupted by a single line of footprints leading farther inside. Ava counted them. One person. Walking in, none walking out. The tunnel widened into a circular chamber supported by thick concrete columns. The room was almost empty. Almost. In the center stood a large wooden table beneath a hanging industrial light. The bulb still glowed. On the table rested dozens of cardboard archive boxes. Each carried a handwritten year: 1978, 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982, 1983. Ava carefully opened the nearest box. Inside were hundreds of neatly organized folders: property deeds, financial ledgers, shipping invoices, personal correspondence. Every document had been preserved in waterproof sleeves. Someone had built an archive, not of history, of secrets. A forensic accountant began examining one of the ledgers. His expression changed almost immediately. These numbers don't belong to one company. What do you mean? They belong to dozens. He turned several pages. Construction firms, transport businesses, waste contractors, real estate partnerships, different names, different owners. The money, however, always flowed through the same sequence of accounts before disappearing. The ledger wasn't simply recording transactions. It was documenting an entire hidden financial network. Then another investigator called from the far side of the chamber. Behind the archive shelves, concealed by a canvas curtain, stood a massive wall map of Blackridge and surrounding counties. Colored pins covered the surface: blue, red, black. Every abandoned location Ava had investigated was marked: the bridge, the lighthouse, the warehouse, the quarry, the cabin. They weren't isolated places. They were connected points in a system, a route, a chain. As Ava stepped closer, she noticed one final marker. Unlike the others, it was gold. Beside it, someone had written 2 words: final record. No address, no coordinates, only a symbol matching the one carved into the hidden doorway. Silence settled over the chamber. The investigation had changed once again. Noah Ellis had never uncovered a single crime. He had stumbled across the edge of something much older, something that had quietly survived through changing companies, changing owners, and changing generations. Somewhere beyond the maze of tunnels, the final record still existed. And judging by the fresh footprints leading deeper underground, someone had reached it before the detectives.